The fact that Arsenal needed a striker in January is undeniable. We didn't get one. We've all tried to move on, although it's increasingly difficult when week by week we seem to be losing attacking players. But given all the talk around Alexander Isak, Benjamin Sesko, and Matheus Cunha, I thought it would be interesting to compare those three players statistically to the man currently tasked with leading our line, Kai Havertz. We'll get into that and more on today's episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's do it. Hey, everybody, how are we? Hope you're all good. Hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday so far. Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Tuesday, cloudy, miserable, freezing cold outside. It's basically your typical February London day. I don't know why I'm complaining about it. I've lived here long enough to know what it's all about. But we've got some Champions League tonight to get into. Some really interesting games. You know, would you be watching the game that could potentially push through Arsenal's next opposition in the Champions League, Juve against PSV? Or will you choose the blockbuster tie, Manchester City against Real Madrid? Well, guess what? I'm not going to be watching any of them because I am commentating tonight on Barrow versus MK Dons. Yes, what a game. Hopefully, it's at least semi-entertaining. I knew that I was going to get loads of stick, right, as soon as I went live on this episode because of the title. So let me set the scene a little bit. Before I do that, though, just a quick reminder before I forget, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and if you're listening to us on audio, please do subscribe and leave us a review. All of that stuff really, really does help. But I do feel like before we dive into today's analysis and today's content, I've got to set the scene a little bit just to make it clear what my stance and view is on what we're about to discuss. We needed a striker in January badly. That is not even debatable. So when I'm comparing Kai Havertz today to some of these names, Alexander Isak, Benjamin Sesko, and Matheus Cunha, please don't take it as though I'm saying we didn't or we don't need a striker. We absolutely do. And please don't take it as though I'm totally satisfied or even content with the lack of business that we did in January, because I think we've left ourselves incredibly short. I think we've left ourselves in a really dangerous position. And I fear that between now and the end of the season, any chance that we had of achieving our objectives, whether that be catching Liverpool or going really, really far, possibly all the way in the Champions League, I think they're going to be impacted by the decisions that we took in January. So I'm really worried about what the rest of the season holds. Can the boys prove me wrong? Hopefully. Can we put a run of results together that just calms the nerves down of Arsenal fans all over the globe who are concerned by the lack of options? Can we just ride through this period until Bukayo Saka comes back, and then will everything be all rosy again? Can we get Saka and Martinelli back soon, meaning that, you know, we're kind of okay for what remains of the season? That's what I want. That's what I want. Obviously, but I can't help the concern that I'm feeling at the moment. Just on that point around it being like not debatable, because I don't think it is debatable. Jid disagrees in the comments, and that's fine. Let's have a look at what Jid is saying. He says, yes, it is debatable, Harry. What do you mean it's not debatable? Are Arsenal short of goals? No. 1 minute you say we need creativity, then you cave after a little bit of pressure and say we need a striker. I say that we need creativity because I don't think we create as many big chances with the number of games that we dominate as we should. I just don't think we do. So I still think we need some creativity. We need another creative option outside of Martin Odegaard. For sure, we absolutely do need that. But we also need another striker because we've only got one right now. Like, why is that so hard for some people to comprehend? I think we desperately need another body. Mikel Arteta kept saying we don't need another body. We need a player that improves us. Actually, we've got to the critical state where we do need another body in that centre forward position, because when I'm thinking about what we could do alternatively to using Kai Havertz there, I'm thinking Martinelli is injured. I'm thinking Trossard, not quite as effective as I'd want him to be. So I end up in a situation where, you know, where I'm worried and I'm nervous and I'm panicking. That's just the way it goes, as far as I see it, you know, and people can disagree. That's absolutely fine. You know, that's not an issue at all. Please please let me know what you think. And of course, I'd love to get you guys' responses and answers to all the stuff that we're talking about and all the stuff we're debating as the live stream goes on. If you're listening on audio, you can, of course, get in touch via social media. You can hit me up on X. You can hit me up on TikTok, Instagram. You can leave a comment on the YouTube video if you wander over from the podcast platforms. I think on Spotify you can leave comments on them on episodes now as well, which is pretty cool. So yeah, get in touch. I'd love to hear from you guys. But listen, I respect Jid's point of view, but I think we need another striker, and I think most people will probably agree with that. I know that the majority don't always get it right. We've seen that with a lot of things, Brexit being one of them. But I think it's fair to say that when you've only got one striking option at a club like Arsenal with the ambitions that Arsenal should have, to say that that is critical in terms of the situation that you find yourself in, I think is really fair. I don't think I'm being unfair. I don't think I'm overstepping the mark. So, as I say, I wanted to dig into how Kai Havertz statistically compares to Alexander Isak, Benjamin Sesko, and Matheus Cunha. Those are the three names that were probably linked with Arsenal the most. They've been consistent links over a long period of time now. Let me be clear. I don't think Kai Havertz is anywhere near as good as Alexander Isak. I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. Let me be clear that I think Benjamin Sesko has the makings of a real top striker, but I'm still a little bit on the fence about him. And Matheus Cunha, I really like him. He's going through a really, really good spell at the moment. My fear with Matheus Cunha is this a purple patch or is this a level that he can maintain? So we're going to get into all of this stuff now. And what we're going to do is we're going to break it down via a number of categories. We're going to talk goals, obviously top line stuff. We're going to talk shots, passing, shot creating actions, defensive actions to show how they do or do not contribute to what the rest of the team is trying to do. We're going to talk about where they have their touches, who's most involved. And what I'm going to do is in front of me, I've got a pad and a pen, and I'm going to tick each of these players off each time they win one of these categories that we're breaking down. And then we can have a look at it afterwards and try to come to some sort of conclusion, some sort of assessment. This is not pre-recorded. This is not me having gone through everything and written down everything that I want to say and just spewing it off to you guys. This is a live bit of analysis. So will I jump around a little bit? Maybe. Will I change my mind as we go through the pod? Maybe. But I thought the live element will be pretty cool for those that are able to join the live stream. Okay, then. Let's do this. Let's talk. Havertz versus Isak, Sesko, and Cunha. We're going to break it all down right after this. Okay, then let's have a look. FB Ref is the source of our statistics today. And we're going to start off with really, really top line basic stuff. We're going to talk about number of goals scored. Now, I've only taken into consideration, because of FB Ref's filters and the way it works, I've just gone with domestic leagues. Okay, so all the statistics that I'm going to show you, all the metrics that I'm going to show you are based purely on how these players are performing in their domestic league. So if we look at goals scored, you've got Kai Havertz on 9. Alexander Isak is way out in front of everybody with 17, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. And then we've got Benjamin Sesko on 9, Matheus Cunha on 11. When it comes to assists, Alexander Isak is leading the way with 5. Second is Cunha with 4. And Havertz and Sesko have 3 apiece each, right? So if you look at goals and assists, total goal contributions for Kai Havertz is 12. For Alexander Isak, it's 22. For Benjamin Sesko, it's 12. And for Matheus Cunha, it's 15. The thing that I find really, really interesting here, right? Like, we know that Alexander Isak is top of the class here, right? When it comes to goals scored, we know that Alexander Isak is an incredible finisher. I think that's one of his best attributes. I love the way he strikes the ball. I love how confident he is in taking the shot on from certain positions of difficulty. And I did a bit of analysis on the post-Newcastle pod that we did about how early he takes the shots and how important that is in terms of not always giving the goalkeeper time to set or read where he's going to place it, where he's going to put it. I think that's massive. And I think Alexander Isak is the best goal scorer of the lot. Like, the numbers tell you that's the case. The eye test tells me that's the case. Because although we're focusing on numbers and statistics today, I'm not just a statistics guy. I do like to think of myself as someone who trusts in the eye test quite a bit as well, and feels as though, at least from sort of my experience of watching football, playing football, and now obviously working in football, that I've got a decent eye. I feel like yeah, I trust my judgment in that sense. So when it comes to goals and assists, Alexander Isak is winning here. Okay, there's no doubt about that. But some of the things that I wanted to just sort of dive into a little bit deeper. XG, okay, so expected goals. Kai Havertz is on 9 goals and his XG is 9.4. So he's only marginally underperforming his XG, which I don't think is the perception. I think when you talk to Arsenal fans, they will tell you that Kai Havertz is generally quite wasteful in front of goal. And whilst I can think of examples where he has been and examples of where he should have scored and didn't, when you look at his XG, it's really interesting, isn't it, that there isn't that much difference between what he's expected to score and what he's actually converting. So, yeah, 9.4 XG, 9 goals. He's only 0.4 off of actually achieving his expected goals. So is he that wasteful? Is he as wasteful as people like to package it up? I don't know. I know there'll be other examples. I know we're talking about, for instance, the goal that he should have scored in the first leg of the Carabao Cup, where he missed that header at 2-0 in the first leg. But of course, that is not included in these statistics. We're looking at league only because that's what I've found. But yeah, I mean, the perception is that he misses an awful lot of chances, and actually the stats and the numbers don't really back that up. If you look at Alexander Isak, his expected goals is 14.1 and he's managed 17. So he is overperforming in terms of his XG. He is scoring more chances than he'd be reasonably expected to convert. And that says so much about his efficiency in front of goal. Benjamin Sesko is also outperforming his XG, but maybe a slight concern here is that his XG is significantly lower than that of the two that we've just mentioned. His XG, Benjamin Sesko's, is 5.3, and he's got 9 goals. So he is, of course, outperforming it by nearly 4. Matheus Cunha's XG is also quite low, 5.2. He is producing 11 goals, or has produced 11 goals in the league so far this season. So he is performing more than double of what his XG. So we're talking about Alexander Isak being incredibly efficient, but if you talk about the ratios and the percentages by how much they're outperforming their XGs, Matheus Cunha leads here. And I'm going to give this point in my sort of scoring system to Alexander Isak because he's got the most goals and he's got the most assists, which is ultimately what we're looking at here. But if you look at some of the underlying metrics, it's quite clear that Matheus Cunha has been more efficient than anybody in this area over the course of the season so far. Really, really interesting that. If we take it on and have a look at shooting, and we look at the number of shots that these guys have, and this is shots total. Kai Havertz has had 52 shots at goal in the league this season. Alexander Isak's had 63. So although he's only taken 11 more shots, he's managed nearly double the amount of goals. So again, that speaks to Alexander Isak's efficiency in comparison to Kai Havertz's. And then you've got Benjamin Sesko, who has had 35 shots and managed 9 goals, which is pretty decent. But the number of shots is really low there. That volume would concern me. And then you've got Matheus Cunha, who takes on more shots than anybody else, has 11 goals. So I was just talking about him outperforming his XG, but is he taking on shots from ridiculous positions maybe? Is that what is skewing this statistic a little bit? In terms of shooting and efficiency, you got to say, again, Alexander Isak is the best shooter of the lot. 63 shots. So he ranks second in number of shots taken, but he's way out in front in the number of goals scored. So he is really, really performing well in that department. If we move on to passing, and passing is always an interesting one because I think that we look at strikers through the lens of got to score goals, got to take chances, etc., etc. And while that's incredibly important, I think in certain teams, you're required to be a good passer. You're required to be someone that the team can play through. Often when you are the centre forward, you can find yourself isolated, especially when you're playing against low blocks. But all of these players would have experienced this at one point or another. I think the one who probably experiences it the least is Matheus Cunha because he is playing in a side that are normally playing counter-attacking football. RB Leipzig do like to take the game to people from what I've seen of them this season. Newcastle United certainly do most of the time, unless they're facing Arsenal. And Arsenal often find themselves dealing with low blocks. So if we look at passing, this is passes completed. Kai Havertz has completed 400. Alexander Isak, 348. Benjamin Sesko, again, significantly less than everybody else in another metric, 262 passes. And Matheus Cunha's completed 543. So if you look at that, you will see that Matheus Cunha is probably the most involved of those four players in his team's build-up. And that, I think, has prompted questions about whether or not Matheus Cunha is actually the out-and-out striker and goal scorer that maybe a lot of Arsenal fans wanted to see. But to me, this shows that he's constantly involved, right? So if he's taking more shots than anybody else by quite some distance, if he's completing more passes than everybody else, what that tells me is that Matheus Cunha is heavily involved in football matches all of the time. If we look at goal and shot creating actions, you're looking at shot creating actions. You're looking at, again, Matheus Cunha leading the way, 79 for him. So he's really, really creative. He's really, really involved in the build-up. He's really, really involved in the link-up play. Alexander Isak is creating 73 shot creating actions per game, or is producing 73 shot creating actions per game. His goal tally is way in front of everybody else's. So again, it highlights that in front of goal, Alexander Isak is certainly the more efficient of the lot. Benjamin Sesko, though, 28 shot creating actions over the course of the league season so far. That's not very good, is it? It's not very good at all. Defensive actions, if you want to look at tackles, Kai Havertz is second in this, not quite top of the pile. In fact, he's a million miles off of the top of the pile because Matheus Cunha again leads the way with 30. Matheus Cunha ranks incredibly highly in every single metric that we've looked at so far. Obviously, efficiency can be questioned when Alexander Isak is producing so much more in front of goal. Or do you have to look at it through a slightly different lens and say, Alexander Isak is a really, really good finisher and a much better finisher than Matheus Cunha. But does Matheus Cunha give you a little bit more in terms of dropping deep and getting involved? Does the team that he plays for and the game plan and the style factor into this? I think it does. Because I think when you are a lone striker in a better team, yes, you're going to get a better quality of opportunities. You should get more opportunities in theory, but you'll also spend a fair amount of time being quite isolated and being the attention of a couple, sometimes three centre halves, and people focus quite a lot on stopping the ball reaching you and getting to you in the first place. The fact that Wolves play the way that they do probably allows it probably allows Matheus Cunha to go and drift and do other things which kind of prop up the metrics. But in terms of being the out-and-out goal scorer, it's clear that Alexander Isak is the one here. It's just interesting to see Cunha come out on top in so many different areas. Again, when I look at possession, and I'm looking at touches, because I think that gives you an indication of how involved players are in a game. You got Havertz on 768, Isak on 704, Benjamin Sesko again on significantly less than everybody else with 553. But then again, guess who's leading the way? And again, by quite some distance, Matheus Cunha, 1,075 touches. Now, if you look at how many of those are in the attacking third, 473 for Cunha, 94 of those inside the opposition penalty area. Sesko has 194 touches in the attacking third, just 46 in the box. Alexander Isak has 127 in the opposition box, 408 overall. And Kai Havertz has 103 in the opposition penalty area. But in the attacking third, it's 403. So again, a nice comparison here to do is Havertz versus Isak, okay? Isak has more touches inside the penalty area, yes, but only 24 more. That shouldn't account for the disparity between the number of goals that the two players have scored. To go from 9 goals, having 103 touches in the opposition penalty area, to 17 with just 24 more touches, that's a real step up in efficiency. So again, Alexander Isak showing that he is probably the most potent. Not going to focus too much on playing time and the other stuff here. But those were just some of the numbers that jumped out of me. So my conclusion and my summary, I guess, having looked into all of that, is that it's clear that Alexander Isak is head and shoulders above all the others in terms of his efficiency in front of goal. There's no question about that. He is the one. He is the guy that if we were going to go all out for somebody, and if we could make it happen, even if it took north of 100 million, 120 million, 130 million, whatever, I think when you look at Alexander Isak's numbers this season, they are bloody scary. And he is the guy. He is the one. I look at Sesko, and based on what I read, it seems like people are really sold on him. And it seems to me like he was viewed as a much better option than Matheus Cunha throughout the January window that just went. And obviously the Sesko links have existed for some time, and they've been there in the past as well. So, that feels like a lot of people's first choice, assuming that maybe, Alexander Isak is out of reach, as a lot of people would tell you. And I've just had a message, by the way, from a Newcastle United supporter, a good friend of mine, Chris, who saw my Instagram story and said, "Keep Isak's name out of your goddamn mouth." But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me that so many people are sort of dead set on Benjamin Sesko, won't really give Matheus Cunha the time of day in terms of their analysis and in terms of, their sort of, won't give Matheus Cunha the time of day. Yet in so many of the metrics, he wildly outperforms Benjamin Sesko. Is it an age thing? Of course, Benjamin Sesko is younger and probably still has that time and that ability to improve. Okay. But we were talking in the January window, certainly about the here and now. It was never really about the future for me. I know the club are very sort of adamant that they're going to sign players that fit into the overall strategy, et cetera, and that's what they want to do. But for me, it was about the here and now. And to overlook the here and now, I think is wrong. If you're now moving it on into the summer because we didn't sign anyone in January, then maybe I'm more accepting of a sort of longer term approach. But I just think that it's interesting how Cunha ranks so highly versus Sesko in so many different things, because in my head, that wasn't the case. In my mind, that wasn't the case, just based on the narrative around Benjamin Sesko, how good everybody seems to think he is, and how unconvinced people were by the idea of Matheus Cunha coming in. So in terms of conducting this bit of analysis and going through the numbers and marrying that up with what my eyes tell me, I'm not surprised that Alexander Isak is the best. That would have been my opinion in the first place, right? So I'm not surprised by that. I'm not really surprised by how competitive, at least, Kai Havertz is in some of the metrics. Obviously, the goal scoring one, he's behind Cunha and Isak, but he's on par with Benjamin Sesko, who plays in a much lower standard of league, which I think also has to be factored in here, okay? Because we're doing the analysis across 4 players, 3 of whom all play in the same league, okay, in varying quality of teams, which can make a difference. Benjamin Sesko plays in another league where it's notoriously easier to score goals, yet isn't ahead of Kai Havertz in that department, isn't ahead of him in terms of assists either. In fact, when it comes to goals and assists and direct goal contributions, they're on exactly the same number. So if you're looking at Benjamin Sesko and going, bloody hell, he's really efficient and he's the one that we need, and he's much more efficient than Kai Havertz, well, actually, he's not. Actually, he's not. I know that you could make the case that he is in some ways because he's got so many less shots, for example, than Kai Havertz. He's got 15 less shots than Kai Havertz. Is that a massive amount? I don't think it really is. But he's so uninvolved in stages as well, Benjamin Sesko, looking at these metrics, that you could make the counter argument that, well, if he's got less of the ball and he's got less opportunities and less touches in the box, etc., but he's still on the same level of goals as Kai Havertz, that actually says a really, different story. And that if he came to Arsenal, you would see him pick up in terms of his goals and outputs. Yeah, I think that's valid, and I think that's fair to say. But when you look at the actual numbers, just top level numbers, like they're on the same numbers. So this idea that Kai Havertz is wildly underperforming, and I brought it to your attention that his XG is 9.4 in the league and he scored 9. So he's not massively underperforming in any department, really. But could we do with an upgrade? Absolutely. Could we do with another option? For sure. In fact, I think we desperately, desperately need it. But just looking through it all, as I say, in summary, Isak was my number one. There was never any question about that. Sesko in my head was the number two. But when I look through these statistics, it's clear that Matheus Cunha is currently outperforming him in a lesser side at Wolves. Let's be honest, RB Leipzig are not fighting for relegation in the Bundesliga. Wolves are certainly in the mix still for the drop in the Premier League. So, when you take that all into consideration, you take into consideration how involved Matheus Cunha is as well. I would now put him ahead of Benjamin Sesko in terms of their current levels of performance. When you go out and sign a player for big money, you have to consider a lot of things. Potential is one of them. Is it a long-term investment? That's another thing you got to look at and think about. So I appreciate and understand why people would still prefer Sesko to Cunha, but it's clear that the Brazilian is outperforming the Slovenian quite significantly at this moment in time, just based on those numbers and based on that analysis. Get your questions in, get your thoughts in. I'd love to hear from you guys before we sign out. Apologies if we were jumping around a little bit with the numbers. As I said, we did it live, so yeah, it was always going to be a little bit all over the place, but I hope the numbers came across and the point came across as well. Jid says, don't you think that your analysis up to this point is devoid of the roles they have in their respective team setups? Well, obviously the numbers don't tell you the full story, which is why we're basing it not just on numbers, but on eye test as well. And I said that sort of early on in the pod, that these numbers are there to further inform me, not to completely dictate my opinion. And I think, yeah, the roles are really important. Like, I think Kai Havertz is a lot more all-encompassing, for instance, than Benjamin Sesko. And that's why he leads him in so many other sort of metrics outside of just, goals and assists. It's the same. It's exactly the same. It's bang on. But in terms of touches, in terms of involvement, Kai Havertz leads him by quite some distance. Why? Because Kai Havertz has a more all-encompassing role in this Arsenal team. Benjamin Sesko's touches are low, and sort of his involvement in the game seems to be low when you look at the number of passes and how significantly lower that is than the other players that we're comparing him to today. But that is partly down to his role. I do take that into consideration. Alexander Isak doesn't have to come deep as much. He doesn't have to get involved in the build-up as much as some of the other options. And then there's Matheus Cunha, who's at the opposite end of the spectrum, who I would argue is someone who gets involved in the build-up even more than Kai Havertz does. Right? So, of course, I've factored all of that stuff in. But then if you don't look at the numbers and if you sort of obsess over their roles, and their roles play a part in the analysis, as I've just said, but if you obsess over that, then how can you ever compare any players that play in different teams? You just couldn't, right? So we've got to try and take the pieces that we have and try and put them together in a way that makes the most sense. And I think it's fair to say, when you look at this, that the most out and out forward of these four is Alexander Isak. Is actually, do you know what? It might even be Benjamin Sesko because of how uninvolved he is in the rest of the game. But Alexander Isak is just incredibly potent and incredibly efficient. Kai Havertz and Matheus Cunha fall into a similar category for me as players who are very, very much involved in the build-up, who work incredibly hard, who give you a lot outside of just their goal and assist contributions. And that's why I think when we were talking about Cunha, when he was first linked with Arsenal, I mentioned that I thought he could be a decent fit for that reason, because it felt like it wouldn't be a dramatic change or a dramatic change of direction for Mikel Arteta and Arsenal. If Matheus Cunha come into the team, he would still be that all-encompassing centre-forward that Kai Havertz is, albeit scoring more goals, taking more shots, etc., based on this season statistics. But, the change and the drop-off wouldn't be too different. The style wouldn't be impacted too much. And I know people say you need different options, but I think sometimes continuity is important as well. And habit is important. Knowing where people are going to be, knowing what positions they're going to take up, that helps you to create because there's a familiarity. Bring someone else in who never drops deep and plays off the shoulder all the time. All of a sudden, your midfield have to play a different type of pass. your fullbacks are looking to do something completely different when they venture into the attacking third. Do they put it in the box early, or do they bring the ball back inside like they do in this current team? So there's loads and loads to factor in. There's so many interesting points that you can raise and look through and go into when doing this kind of analysis. And I agree with you that you have to think about their respective roles and setups, but you can also look at number of shots and how many of them they score. You can also look at how many touches they have to gauge how involved they are in the game, generally speaking. And that could be a system thing, or it could be just that player in particular likes to go roaming and likes to force his way into a game, even when he's on the peripheries of it. There are so many things at play here, but there are certain metrics that you can read from. Okay. For example, if your XG is 9.4 and you've scored 9 goals in the league, like Kai Havertz has, then maybe talk of you being the worst finisher in the Premier League is a little bit ridiculous. If your XG is 14 and you've scored 17, like Alexander Isak has, then it's fair to say that you are, if not the best, one of the best finishers in this division and deserve all the plaudits that are coming your way. If you're Benjamin Sesko, and again, you're outperforming your XG, you can talk about efficiency, but then I'd always ask the question, why is he so uninvolved in all the other metrics? And then you've got Matheus Cunha, who, if we're talking about Sesko being super, by the way, clinical, Matheus Cunha's XG is less, yet he's scored 2 more goals than him and produced another assist. So, Cunha's overall goals and assist contribution is 15. Sesko's is 12. And Cunha's XG is even lower than Benjamin Sesko. So that, for me, validates my point that it ranks like this. Isak, the best. Cunha second. Sesko third. Where you want to put Kai Havertz in that is debatable for me. I think because Kai Havertz is contributing in so many different other ways, I would say that Kai Havertz probably slots in just ahead of Benjamin Sesko, but behind Isak and Cunha, if I'm comparing the 4 players. If I'm drawing up a league table of the 4 players based on right now's performance. Do I think Sesko's got the ability to be better than Kai Havertz in the future? Yes, I do. But if we're looking about the here and now, that's what I think. I think if I was ranking them, taking into consideration all the numbers that we've looked at today, it would go Isak, Cunha, Havertz, and Sesko. That's my opinion. That's how I read it. Casey Clips just talking about a potential formation rejig, which we discussed on one of yesterday's episodes. You can check it out. It's the last episode on your feed if you're listening on audio, and it's the last video on the channel if you're watching us on YouTube. He says, what do you think about White going into the right back slot and Timber being pushed up to right wing to cover for our attacking shortage? He's strong, quick, can beat a player, and can put a ball in. I got to say, I'm not overly comfortable with a player who's played most of his career at centre-back and has been switched to a fullback since arriving at Arsenal, now being pushed onto the right wing. I don't think it works. I think there are other ways that we can compensate for the lack of players. None of them are ideal, by the way, but that's just the situation we find ourselves in. But yeah, I personally, mate, I disagree. I know you're not the only one to say that. So I think there is an idea that, we can push some players forward and try and cover things like that. But I personally don't agree with that. Let's take this one from Derek. Harry, are there any other young players coming through that may get a chance as we are so short? Are they in Dubai? I don't know really how to kind of answer that question, because there's players like, for example, we saw Butler Oyedeji come on in the Champions League, right? We had a brief look at him, very, very brief look at him. I don't even think it was 2 minutes. How do you judge these players when they've not played senior football? And that's the thing, right? You can look at a player in the academy, and I've looked at many players in the academy over the years and thought, wow, he's really good. He's head and shoulders above his peers. He is going to be a really, really big star in the future. And it's just not always materialized because there are so many other factors, right? Physically, are you going to grow? Are you going to get to the point that you need to be at physically? Are you going to be able to take the scrutiny? Is your mentality right to take that step up? There's so many factors that you have to consider. And when these players are coming in and out of the squad, going on training camps, obviously that stuff helps in terms of building up experience and an understanding of where you're going. But at the same time, I think that one of the problems with the modern academy setups is that these players get to sort of like 21, 22 and they haven't played any senior football yet. And that can't be right. Like, unless they've gone out on loan, they haven't played any senior football. Like Nathan Butler-Oyedeji's 22 years old. He's 22 years old. He's played 11 times on a loan at Accrington Stanley and 13 times on loan at Cheltenham Town. That's all the senior football he's played. How could I possibly judge him? But then I look at Ethan Nwaneri, who's 17 and is now playing senior football. He's 5 years his junior, and he's already had that experience. So when you get to that point, when you get to the stage of sort of being ready to jump up into the first team, you're often doing it without having had a great deal of experience. And it's how quickly you learn and how quickly you develop, I think, that will determine whether or not you can make it. It's really, really tough to gauge how good, how ready, or how far off it a lot of these players are. So yeah, let's see. Kwame says, hi Harry, we are raving about Isak, but do we really need him? Do we really need him? I mean, I don't know. I'd love to have him though. Do I really need a Ferrari? No, but I'd love to have one. I think you should always strive to bring in the best players. When you're a club of our size, you should be looking to do that at every opportunity. And he is top of the class for me. You know, this number crunching that we've done this morning, it just backs up what I already believed, which is that he's incredibly potent in front of goal, that he's very involved, not quite as involved as Cunha and Havertz maybe in the build-up, but that's because he probably doesn't need to be. I think Isak is the one. You know, he is the one. But it's not a given that we're going to be able to get him. Like, we're going to have to pay a hell of a lot of money. Are Newcastle going to be willing to part ways with him? Full stop. Our hope is that they don't get into the Champions League, because if they fail to make the Champions League, then I think it starts to become an issue for Alexander Isak, and he starts to think twice about his future. But if they make the Champions League, let's say they win the domestic cup, you know, he'd be in a really great place and at a really exciting point in Newcastle's history, and they're not going to want to let go of him. They're not going to want to let go without a fight. So, is it viable? The truth is, guys, I don't know. But he is the one for me. He is the one for me. And you should always aim for the best, right? If you can't get the best, then you start to look at other options. But for now, you know, that's the guy I've got my sights set on. That's the guy I'm hoping for. If we ended up with Benjamin Sesko, I'd be pleased because I think he's got the potential. If we had ended up with Matheus Cunha, wouldn't have been my first, probably not even my second choice. But looking at those metrics, I would be confident that he can have an impact. I would have taken Ollie Watkins for the here and now, a player that we were linked with, of course, during the January window. We've ended up with none of them, and that's a major frustration. But I just thought it'd be interesting to have a look at how much better, if at all, some of these players that we've been linked with are actually than Kai Havertz. Because all I hear about is Kai Havertz this and Kai Havertz that. And I've said it 1,000,001 times before. You got to look at the collective. The collective is not scoring enough goals. It's not necessarily Kai Havertz that we should be beating with a stick every time Arsenal don't win a football game. It can't be, because when you look at these three players that we've been linked with, he doesn't even rank bottom of those three. So to say definitively that all three of them are better than him or a better option than him is factually incorrect. What is fair to say is that we needed another player that could come in and maybe share that responsibility with him, because my problem is always this. We are one Kai Havertz injury away from a massive problem at centre forward. Like, one injury away. And that's the issue I have. That's the problem we've left ourselves with. And that is as a consequence of not doing any business in January. So that's my gripe at the moment. That's my frustration. I wanted to do this bit of analysis to highlight that actually there isn't a great deal of difference in terms of what Havertz outputs in comparison to some of the others. Cunha's got 2 more league goals than him, yet he's being talked about as a really, really exciting player and one of the best in the league at the moment. And then you've got Benjamin Sesko, who, okay, is less involved in the game and maybe gets less opportunities looking at these numbers. But the guy that everybody's raving about, or a lot of people are raving about, he hasn't actually scored any more league goals than Kai Havertz. So the point I wanted to make here is that the analysis is not clear, cut and dry. It's not as simple as saying he's better than him and he's better than him. There's a lot of different ways you can sort of digest this information, and a lot of ways you can draw up your conclusions. But the point is that we definitely need another player. And if we could get any of these guys in the summer, I'd be pretty content with that. But we're going to have to wait and see. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Hope you enjoyed the chat. A little bit difficult to come up with news content at the minute because obviously the guys are in Dubai. Nothing's really happening as far as we're aware. We'll get back to focusing on football matches towards the end of the week. But for now, there's a little bit of statistical comparison for you guys. Kai Havertz versus Alexander Isak, Benjamin Sesko, and Matheus Cunha. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you haven't done so already. We are seriously slacking in terms of likes, given the number of you that are live with us right now. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Make sure, if you're listening on audio, you leave us a review. And I will see you all on the next episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner Pod. Until then, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.